is a privilege, and it is not something that I have to receive or something that I should receive. And I'm asking today for your mercy.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder.
My whole family has been receiving death threats, and I just would like for you guys to protect them.
That is a former #1 high school football player in the country, standing in front of a judge, begging for his own family to be kept safe. And the wild part is that he is the one who just got charged with gruesomely taking a life. Now listen to the woman who was only there to do her job that night. The bartender who caught a bullet in both of her hands while she was trying to break up a fight that was never even hers to begin with.
It was the most terrifying thing I've ever been through. It happened so fast that I didn't really have time to get scared when it happened, but it keeps coming back. It replays in your mind over and over.
Well, hold that thought, because we are going all the way in. We start in a small Florida town called DeLand, a place of around 40,000 people, close enough to Daytona Beach that you can smell the ocean on a good day. This is where Avante Williams grew up and became a legend before he was even old enough to drive. The kind of kid the whole town came out to watch on Friday nights knowing they were looking at something special. He was that good, and everybody who followed his rise all believed the same thing about where he was going to end up.
No. Breaking news. The former #1 high school safety in the country has been arrested and charged with murder. This is 24-year-old Avante Williams from DeLand, Florida.
Before we get to how it all fell apart, you have to understand just how high this young man was flying, because the hype around him was real and it started early. Coming out of DeLand High School, Williams was ranked as one of the very best safeties in the entire country in the 2020 class, a 4-star talent that basically every big program in America wanted a piece of. Alabama called for him, so did Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, LSU, and Florida, and the scouts kept comparing him to a Pro Bowl safety named Budda Baker. He was so far ahead of everybody his age that he reportedly got a scholarship offer from the University of Florida while he was still only in the 8th grade, which is a thing that almost never happens to anybody, anywhere. In his senior season, even while dealing with injuries, he put up around 40 tackles with a few forced fumbles and a couple of interceptions. And he did it on a lean, muscular frame, with real speed, the kind of body and instincts that had people already picturing him on Sundays. Everything about him screamed future professional, and the town of DeLand held on to that dream like it belonged to all of them. He chose the University of Miami and became a Hurricane, and for a little while it really looked like the plan was working out just the way everybody drew it up. But the trouble showed up fast, because in the summer of 2021, while he was still just a freshman, Williams got arrested on charges of aggravated battery on a pregnant woman who was reported to be his girlfriend at the time. Miami suspended him and then cut him from the team, and the way the local news covered it back then already carried a heavy, uncomfortable feeling that is hard to shake once you know the rest.
Hey, Avante, do you have anything to say? Police say that you beat your pregnant girlfriend, did you?
No comments, please.
Those charges were eventually dropped after the accuser took her story back, and Williams was allowed to return to the field after sitting out 6 games. He never fully lived up to the promise of that hype, though, and after a while he transferred to the University of Maryland for one quiet season, where he barely saw the field before his college career just kind of faded out, with no professional contract waiting for him on the other side. He also reportedly picked up more legal trouble in Orange County in 2023, and by then the shine that had followed him since middle school had worn all the way off. So he came back home to DeLand, the same town that once treated him like royalty, and packed the stands to watch him play. And now he was just another young man back in the neighborhood, with a big name and nothing left to show for it. And that is where the final chapter of his story begins. Now let me put you onto the other man in this, because for a while the media could not even agree on who he really was. His name was Keshad Harris, 32 years old, a lifelong DeLand resident who went by the name Southside Shad. Some of the early reporting doubted whether he actually made music, but the truth is that he did, putting out real tracks going back to 2019. Songs with names like Get Real and Change on Me complete with music videos and a few thousand people following his page, and he was still recording as recently as a collaboration, only a few months before he died. He was a father to one child, and he was not a stranger to trouble either, since years earlier he had been arrested in DeLand accused of tossing more than 100 oxycodone pills during a run-in with police, though nothing violent was ever attached to his name. Most of all, he was in a relationship that had lasted 6 long years. That relationship is the thread that ties this whole thing together and pulls it under. Harris was with a woman named Decassia Bing, and their 6 years together were marked by regular arguments rooted in jealousy, the kind of on-again, off-again tension that plenty of couples know a little too well. Harris was the jealous one in the pairing, always worried about who she was talking to and where she was going, and on the night everything went wrong, that jealousy had him wound up even tighter than usual. It was the 2nd of May in 2025, and Bing had gone out to a family celebration at a community center to honor her cousin finishing nursing school. Harris stayed home, and the two of them spent that entire day going back and forth by text, with him accusing her of being out there flirting on him, the same worn-out argument they had run through more times than either of them could count. She was only there to celebrate family, but the tension in those messages kept climbing all day long, and by the time night fell, Harris was already sitting at home with his mind racing about what she might be doing without him. Then, according to police, Williams showed up at that same party late that night with a friend named Damian Ramsey and a couple of other men, and this is where the fuse really got lit, because Ramsey had a history of wanting Bing for himself. Bing got to that celebration at the Chisholm Community Center earlier in the evening, and the mood shifted for her the moment that group of men rolled in late, because she already knew the history and it made her nervous. First, one of them came over asking for her number on Ramsey's behalf, and then Ramsey himself walked right up and tried to get it, and she turned both of them down flat. But people at the party were already posting on social media, and Harris saw those posts from home and lost it. He texted Bing that he was on his way, pulled up, argued with her out front, and then the two of them left in separate cars going in separate directions. What none of them understood in that moment was that all 3 of these men were about to end up inside the same small bar within the hour, carrying every bit of that heat with them, and only 2 of them were ever going to walk back out of it. Harris pulled up to a spot called McCabe's Bar in downtown DeLand, a little after 1 in the morning on the 3rd of May. About 20 minutes behind him, Williams, Ramsey, and one more man walked into that same bar, and here is a small detail that tells you everything about the mindset in that room. Investigators later pulled the data off of Williams' iPhone and found that he had searched Harris's Instagram page, the one under the name southside.shod, only about an hour before the two of them came face to face. So there was already awareness there, already a specific man on his mind, before anybody in that place ever threw a single punch. The police leaned on video from that night because it laid the whole thing bare.
Now accused of shooting and killing a man named Kashad Harris in a DeLand bar over the weekend. Says they were at the same graduation ceremony just before the shooting. Williams looked Harris up on Instagram that night too. The two started fighting immediately when they walked up to each other.
Around 1:25 in the morning, it all came apart in a matter of seconds. The men started arguing, and then Harris threw the first real blow, punching Williams square in the jaw, and Ramsey jumped in and hit Harris from behind. In the middle of that scramble, prosecutors say Williams pushed Harris back, pulled a handgun from his pocket, and fired into his left side. Harris dropped to the floor and stopped moving, and the part that turns this from a bar fight into a murder charge is what came next, because the shooting did not stop when Harris went down. Williams reportedly kept firing as he ran past the fallen man, hitting him again in the back on his way out the door. The surveillance video reportedly showed him gripping the gun with both hands while Harris's side was wide open, and by the time it was over, the medical examiner would count every wound on Harris's body. Police even recovered a separate, smaller round out in the parking lot afterward, which left open the question of whether a second gun went off in all that madness. When the police captain first stood in front of the cameras, he kept it plain and cold.
Witnesses reported that a physical altercation broke out in the establishment among several men inside the bar. During the altercation, one of the individuals pulled a firearm and began shooting.
Standing in the middle of all that chaos was a bartender named Courtney Rickman, a woman who had done nothing but try to break up a fight that had nothing to do with her at all. A bullet tore straight through both of her hands, leaving her with damage she is still learning to live around every day. And when she finally came home from the hospital, she described exactly what those wounds did to her body.
So my right hand right now has 6 pins in it and some wires. It's extensive nerve damage, ligament damage, tissue damage, and all 3 metacarpal of my fingers.
Even after everything that bullet cost her, Rickman said the thing that stuck with her most was wishing she could have done more to save the man who died.
It made me feel a little bit of relief. Obviously, it doesn't bring the gentleman back that passed away, but it might get him some justice.
Harris was carried out to a truck by other patrons and rushed to the hospital, but he never had a real chance. The autopsy showed that he had been shot 7 times, with 6 of those bullets still lodged inside his body, most of them in his chest and stomach. The medical examiner cataloging wound after wound on a man who only minutes earlier had been standing on his own 2 feet. Williams ran out to a black BMW, jumped in with Ramsey, and vanished into the night. And there were reportedly around 40 people packed into that little bar when the shooting went off, any one of whom could have caught a stray in a room that small with bullets flying. The department got the word out and asked the community for help, and the man leading it made a plea that lands completely different once you already know how it ended.
Bringing a gun to a fist fight is not the solution. Once the trigger is pulled, that could be the end of the victim and the shooter.
The investigation moved fast, mostly because Williams left his own phone behind at the scene, sitting right there near the blood trail, a phone that tied straight back to him once the detectives got into it. A license plate tracking system followed that BMW out of town toward New Smyrna Beach. Witnesses picked Williams out of a photo lineup, and 2 days later, he turned himself in at a lawyer's office and got booked into the Volusia County Jail on a charge of second-degree murder with a firearm. His friend Ramsey, the one who threw a punch and rode out with him, has not been charged, at least not so far, which is one of the loose threads still hanging over this case. When word got out that the accused was that same hometown star everybody once bragged about, the whole town felt it, and social media filled up with people in disbelief that a kid with the whole world in front of him had thrown it all away in a matter of seconds. The police chief wrapped up the whole tragedy in one tired, heavy sentence. Now here is the part I really need you to sit with, because Williams has not been convicted of anything yet, and his side of the story has not fully been told. He got punched first, and his lawyers could point straight at that in a state with strong self-defense laws, so the fight over whether this was murder or something lesser still has to play out in front of a jury. As of right now, he sits held without any bond, still waiting on a trial with no date set, and the whole tension of the case lives inside that one gap, the space between a man who threw a punch and a man who kept pulling the trigger long after the punching was already over. His defense will likely lean on that first punch and the chaos of the moment to argue he feared for his life, while prosecutors will point to the video of him firing at a man already on the ground, and somewhere between those 2 versions, a jury is going to have to decide whether this was a tragedy or a crime, or maybe some painful mix of both. And if you think a former football player getting into it over a woman in a bar is some kind of one-off, it is not, and the courts have actually wrestled with almost this exact thing before. Back in 2012, a former University of North Carolina player named Keenan Gay got into a scuffle at a bar when a heavily drunk man kept putting his hands on the woman Gay loved, and Gay ended up shoving that man out into the street, where a passing car struck and killed him. The man who died had been drinking so hard that his blood alcohol level was reportedly close to 4 times the legal limit, and Gay caught a second-degree murder charge, with prosecutors hammering him for running from the scene and telling the jury that heroes do not run away. But there was no gun anywhere in his case, and after weighing it all, a jury eventually found him not guilty, buying the argument that he was only trying to protect his girlfriend. The difference, of course, is the trigger, because a single shove leaves room for reasonable doubt in a way that 7 bullets in a downed man simply does not, and second-degree murder in Florida can carry a sentence all the way up to life, so that is the exact mountain Williams now has to climb. That is our first man, a rapper laid down in a bar by a football player who had the whole world in front of him and lost every bit of it over jealousy and pride. Our second man lived in a completely different world, way up in the bright lights of the National Football League, And honestly, his story is even harder to sit with, because he did not just take one life on the day everything ended. He took two, and the second one was his own, and it happened in a way that shook the entire league down to its bones.
Police say Belcher killed his girlfriend on Saturday and then killed himself in front of his coach.
His name was Jovan Belcher, and to feel the full weight of what he did, you first have to understand how good of a man the people around him believed he was. Belcher was born in July of 1987 in West Babylon, New York, and he came up as a working-class kid on Long Island with 3 older sisters and a mother named Cheryl, who was the center of his entire world. He did not have a steady father figure around while he was growing up, so he leaned hard on his mama and his sisters, and he poured everything he had into sports as his way out. He was a beast in high school, a 2-time football captain and a 3-time All-American in wrestling, the kind of athlete whose toughness on the mat carried straight over onto the football field. But somehow the big colleges slept on him anyway, so he went off to the University of Maine, a smaller program, and just turned himself into a star there through sheer effort and refusal to quit. He became a Defensive Player of the Year in his conference, earned All-American honors more than once, and was sharp enough in the classroom to graduate early with a degree in child development. He even joined a group in college called Male Athletes Against Violence, which is the kind of detail that makes this whole thing sting so much worse once you learn how it all wound up. Nobody drafted him in 2009, so he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs as a free agent, and simply outworked everyone in the building, clawing his way up from special teams into a full-time starting linebacker spot. By 2012, he had earned himself a 1-year deal worth around $1.9 million, and away from the field, he showed up for his community, doing youth events and heading back home to give motivational speeches to kids who reminded him of himself. His rise in the league was a slow, honest grind, going from a special teams player his rookie year to a full-time starter who put up a career high of around 87 tackles in 2011, second on the whole team. Back home on Long Island, his old high school retired his jersey number, and he kept coming back to speak to the young ones, doing league events, visiting schools, even stopping by military bases. On paper, this was a young man who did just about everything the right way, which is exactly why the people who knew him could never make peace with what came later.
Jovan Belcher had an opportunity.
At just 25 years old, Belcher seemed like he had the world in his powerful hands.
Coaches and teammates painted the same picture of him over and over. A soft-spoken, hard-working man off the field who turned into a relentless competitor once the whistle blew. The kind of guy people called a model citizen with no real red flags in his past. That is exactly what made the ending so impossible to process for the people who loved him, because there was no long record of violence to point back to, no obvious villain in his story, just a young father who seemed to be doing everything right, which is why so many of them kept asking themselves what they could have possibly missed. The woman in his life was named Cassandra Perkins, known to everybody as Cassie, a 22-year-old from Texas who was full of light. Back home, she had been a dancer and a softball player. She worked with children in after-school programs and summer camps, and just about everyone described her as the type with a permanent smile who went out of her way to reach the kids who felt left out. She grew up in Texas, danced with a local team, and taught praise dance at her church, and after moving to Kansas City, she got involved with the Chiefs Women's Organization, the group of players' wives and girlfriends who did charity work around the city. She met Belcher through a Chiefs running back, whose wife happened to be her cousin, and the two of them had a baby girl named Zoe just a few months before all of this, back in the fall of 2012. Here is the part that turns their love story into something much heavier, because that relationship was strained, and it had been for a good while. The couple argued constantly about money, about how to raise the baby, about the partying, and there were even reports of tension over custody and threats to leave, the kind of pressure that builds quietly in a young household with a brand new baby in it. Belcher was quietly seeing other women on the side the whole time, including one he had been dating in secret for most of that year. Cheryl, his mother, had even packed up and moved all the way from New York to Kansas City just to help the two of them with Zoe, and she heard those arguments up close from another room. There were reportedly some dark threats floating around behind the scenes too, the kind of thing people brushed off as talk in the moment, and one of the heaviest details to come out later was that months earlier Belcher had texted the woman he was secretly seeing something about shooting Perkins if she did not leave him alone, a line she said she first took as a joke, The entire situation was sitting right on top of a fault line, just waiting for the ground to shift. That fault line finally cracked open on the night of the 30th of November. Perkins went out to a concert with friends and got back home around 1 in the morning, which set off an argument, and after that she headed back out to a nightlife district near downtown. Belcher went out separately that very same night, over to the apartment of a woman he had been secretly dating for months, and he was drinking heavily, playing cards, moving between her place and a club before the two of them left the district and said their goodbyes late in the night. So there they were, both of them living out that strain in real time, on opposite ends of the same city, both of them out drinking and hurting in their own way, and neither one of them had any idea that the sun was about to come up on the worst morning any of them would ever see. At around 2:50 in the morning, something strange happened that people still argue over. To this very day, the police got a call about a man asleep in a running Bentley outside an apartment building, and when the officers walked up, they found Belcher sitting there behind the wheel. This whole encounter got caught on a dashboard camera, and it was later released to the public for everybody to see.
Police are releasing this footage showing officers finding Kansas City Chiefs linebacker Jovan Belcher asleep in his car and later responding just hours before he killed his girlfriend and later himself.
The officers woke him up, and he was calm and polite about the whole thing, telling them he was just waiting on his girlfriend and had forgotten the gate code. They noticed nothing alarming in that moment, no smell of alcohol on him, and no slurring in his words. So they made the call to cut him a break, telling him plainly that they were trying to help him out, rather than take him in, and they got him inside for the night. He spent the rest of that night on a couch, reportedly laughing and joking with the women there about where he was from and where he played ball. Looking back on it now, a whole lot of people cannot help but wonder how different everything might have gone if that one night had ended some other way, though the officers at the time saw nothing that told them to act. Around 6:30 in the morning, Belcher left that apartment and drove home to the house on Chrysler Avenue, where Perkins, baby Zoe, and his mother Cheryl were all asleep. A fresh argument fired up almost the second he walked in, mostly in and around the master bathroom, and his mother heard the shouting from another room but did not step in, because she had been accused before of getting too involved in their business. Then, at around 7:50 in the morning, she heard the gunshots, and she ran in to find Perkins on the bathroom floor, shot over and over. The autopsy would later show that Perkins had been hit around 9 times, with wounds spread across her neck, her chest, her back, and beyond, some of them the kind that were fatal on their own. Cheryl grabbed the phone and called for help, pleading for the young mother to hang on while the baby was crying somewhere in the background. And in one of the coldest, strangest turns in this whole story, Belcher did not bolt right away. He knelt down beside Perkins and kissed her on the forehead, told her he was sorry, then kissed his crying daughter and his own mother, apologizing to them over and over, before he walked out to that Bentley, with her blood already on his hands, and climbed behind the wheel. He drove about 5 miles to the Chiefs' practice facility, right next to the stadium, the very place that had handed him his whole career and his whole identity. He made that drive with her blood smeared on the gear shift and the interior, reportedly breaking the mirror along the way, a young man in total freefall, behind the wheel of a Bentley. General Manager Scott Pioli happened to be driving through the parking lot when Belcher pulled up and stepped out with a gun already pressed to his own head. Belcher told Pioli calmly that he did it, that he killed her, and then he thanked Pioli and the whole organization for the chance and asked them to take care of little Zoe. Years later, Pioli sat down and tried to put words to what it felt like to watch a man he genuinely cared about reach his final moment right in front of him.
But to see a man kill himself. Yeah.
Head coach Romeo Crennel and a linebackers coach came running out into that lot, and they begged him to put the gun down, telling him he had options and that they could help him figure a way through it. Belcher thanked them too, told them he loved them, and said he had to do this. Then, as the police sirens got close, he stepped away between 2 parked cars, knelt down, made the sign of the cross on his chest, and took his own life, right there in front of the men who had coached him and believed in him. He was only 25 years old. The men who watched it happen were given counseling to try to process what they had just seen, and the very next day the Chiefs still had to go out and play a football game, and they held a moment of silence for the victims of domestic abuse before kickoff. And later that shaken coach said the only honest thing a person could say.
It was an individual that did something that he snapped, and that I don't understand, and I probably never will.
When the autopsy came back, it added a whole other layer to it. Because Belcher's blood alcohol level was measured at 0.17, which is more than twice the legal limit to drive, and experts said it was likely even higher earlier that morning when the shooting actually happened. The news that he was drunk when it all went down became its own headline.
The toxicology report shows Belcher's blood alcohol content was twice the legal limit at the time of the autopsy.
But the drinking was only one part of a much bigger conversation, and one of the loudest voices to jump into it was a famous sportscaster who used his time on national television to talk about guns, which set off a firestorm.
If Jovan Belcher didn't possess a gun, he and Cassandra Perkins would both be alive today.
The other big piece came a lot later, because Belcher's family had his body brought back up out of the ground about a year after his death, and had his brain examined, and the doctor who looked at it found tangles of a protein all through his hippocampus that were consistent with CTE, the brain damage that builds up from repeated blows to the head over years of football. He was only 25, which made him one of the youngest cases anyone had seen, and it raised hard questions, since a couple of head injuries during his career had reportedly gone without proper follow-up. The finding was heavy on its own, especially because the team had always insisted he was not a player with a long history of concussions.
But the Chiefs management says Belcher had no history of head injuries.
He is a player that's not had a long concussion history.
His mother went on to sue the Chiefs, arguing that they ignored the warning signs and pushed him to play through injuries while never treating what was happening in his head, and the whole tragedy became a painful chapter in the league's long reckoning with what the game quietly does to the mind. It landed in the middle of a whole wave of that conversation, coming the same year that an NFL legend named Junior Seau took his own life and had his brain studied for the very same thing. Sadly, this was not even the first time the Chiefs organization had lived through something this dark, because all the way back in 1980, a beloved former Chiefs lineman named Jim Tyrer took the life of his wife and then his own inside their family home, leaving 4 children behind to carry it. Different decade, different man, and the very same devastating pattern of an athlete unraveling after the lights of the game go dim, and the same unanswerable question hanging over both of them, about what was really breaking inside a person that not one soul around them could see in time. That is 2 men now, both of them tied to violence that grew straight out of love turned poisonous. One a rapper caught in another man's jealousy, and one an NFL star who could not outrun whatever was tearing him apart from the inside. Our third man is different from the first 2 in one really big way. He did not pull a trigger on anybody, and he did not lose control in a single hot second. He got hunted down slow, over months, by the person he trusted most in this world, and it took the law more than 7 long years to prove it.
When NBA star Lorenzen Wright's life was cut down in a hail of gunfire.
His name was Lorenzen Wright, and in the city of Memphis he was not just a basketball player, he was the favorite son. He came up out of humble beginnings, the son of a father named Herb, who had once played pro ball himself and later became a Memphis police officer, until Herb was shot in the back on duty and left in a wheelchair when Lorenzen was only 7, still coaching his boy from that chair the whole way up. Lorenzen turned into a McDonald's All-American, then a star at the University of Memphis, and in 1996, he got drafted 7th overall and went on to play 13 seasons in the NBA, including a beloved run with his hometown Memphis Grizzlies. He was a giver by nature, always signing autographs, always taking the picture, always in the community, and to the people of that city, he was the definition of a hometown hero.
Lorenzen Wright is a hometown hero, really. I mean, he was a beloved figure.
Lorenzen's swift rise to the top was rooted in deeply humble beginnings.
At the University of Memphis, he was an All-American who lit the city up before he ever turned pro, and once he made the league, he bounced around to a handful of teams, from the Clippers to the Atlanta Hawks to the Sacramento Kings to the Cleveland Cavaliers, but Memphis and the Grizzlies were always home base. Everywhere he went, people wanted the autograph and the picture, and by every account, he never once acted too big to give it. That is the man the whole city thought they knew. The woman in his story is named Shara. He met her back when he was just a teenager, because her father was one of his youth basketball coaches, and she was about 5 years older than him. They started young, she got pregnant with their first child while he was still a freshman in college, and they married in June of 1998. Together, the two of them built a big family with 7 children in all, including a set of twins. But they carried a deep wound through it too, because one of their baby daughters, a little girl named Sierra, passed away from sudden infant death syndrome, and that loss put cracks in the marriage that never fully closed back up. They started a scholarship fund in that little girl's name, and for a time they looked from the outside like a solid, loving family that had it all figured out. Underneath the surface, though, the marriage was rocky in a whole lot of ways. There was cheating on both sides of it, but Lorenzen especially had a reputation around town, and the documentaries made about this case do not tiptoe around it at all.
It turned out he was a chronic cheater, nearly a woman in every port, as they say. Shira was devastated.
Then there was the money, or really the disappearing of it. Lorenzen earned around $55 million over the course of his NBA career, but by the time he retired, he was in serious financial trouble, with 2 expensive homes falling into foreclosure. He gave to anybody who put a hand out, and the fame and the fortune slipped right through his fingers the same way it does for so many stars who come up from nothing and never learn to hold on to it. By the end, there were creditors circling and 2 big homes slipping into foreclosure, and a man who once earned more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes was suddenly worried about keeping the lights on. The couple separated in February of 2010. Shira filed for divorce, and Lorenzen ended up living hundreds of miles away in Atlanta, lonely and missing his kids something terrible.
By the time he was done playing, he was broke, pretty much. I mean, he had 2 expensive homes that were in foreclosure, and according to Shira, they had a lot of creditors after them.
There was one more warning sign that people would only understand later, because Lorenzen's longtime personal assistant, a woman named Wendy, had watched Shira's anger build over the years and had actually recorded her making threats, reportedly saying more than once that she would kill him, and she gave a copy of that to police. Shira herself later wrote a novel loosely based on the marriage, full of betrayal and rage, and even told a reporter she was working on a sequel in which the husband character gets murdered, which reads very differently once you know how the real story ended. Neighbors would also report seeing her burning items in her backyard just after Lorenzen vanished. By the summer of 2010, Lorenzen was telling his childhood friends that he was thinking about getting back together with Shira and being happy again, because the dating life was not filling him up. So he came back to Memphis to see his children, and on the 18th of July, a close friend dropped him off at Shira's home in Collierville around 10:30 at night. The divorce had been finalized only a few months earlier, so this was a man showing up at his ex-wife's door, still holding on to hope that they might find their way back to each other. He told his friend he would call him later on. That turned out to be the last time anyone who loved him would ever hear his voice alive. A few hours later, just after midnight on the 19th, Lorenzen's cell phone dialed 911, and the dispatcher heard his distressed voice, then a rapid barrage of gunshots, then dead silence. This one call is the most haunting piece of the entire case, the sound of a man running for his life, and his mother would later fight hard to make sure the whole world got to hear it.
Hello? I don't have nothing but gunshots.
Murder.
I want everybody to hear it because I want them to know he was calling for help.
Also, and here is the failure that made all of it so much worse. That call landed at a dispatch center in a nearby town because of the way the cell tower routed it, and instead of being treated like the plain emergency that it was, the dispatcher could not lock down the location, and the call was never properly escalated to anybody who could have rushed out there that night. The details of it are almost hard to believe. Since the location fell right on a jurisdiction line, the tools to map it were limited, and the whole thing got logged as an unknown call from an unknown place, with nobody reporting it up the chain for days. A cry for help with real gunshots on the line simply got dropped through the cracks, and it would end up being more than a week before anybody even started truly looking for him. A failure so serious that it later led to a settlement with his family. Lorenzen's mother, Deborah Marion, reported him missing on the 22nd of July. Shira, meanwhile, fed police a story about him leaving her house that night with a box and some man she claimed she did not know, hinting that he was off to flip something for a big pile of cash, well over $100,000. A story that investigators would later call a straight-up lie, built to steer them the wrong way and hint at some drug deal gone bad. It was not until the 28th of July, more than a week after that 911 call, that searchers finally found him in a wooded field in southeast Memphis. out in a lonely spot that had once been a private getaway for him and Shara back during their marriage. Prosecutors believe that familiarity is exactly what got used against him, luring him somewhere he thought was safe. By the time they found him, the brutal Memphis summer heat had done something almost too painful to describe to his body. A man who stood 6'11" and weighed around 255 pounds in life had wasted down to roughly 57 pounds by the time he was discovered in that field. The autopsy ruled it a homicide, with multiple gunshot wounds that included shots to his head and to his chest. A giant of a man, a beloved hometown hero, reduced to almost nothing out in the open, because nobody got to him in time. Then the case went cold, and it stayed cold for years, which is right where Shara did something that raised every single eyebrow in that city. She collected more than $1 million in life insurance money that was supposed to be for the children, and she burned through most of it, around $973,000, in under a single year on luxury cars, furniture, trips, and a brand new pool. She even wrote and published a novel that was loosely based on her own marriage, packed with jealousy and violence and vengeance, and when a reporter finally sat across from her and asked her straight up whether she had anything to do with the murder, watch closely how she chose to answer him.
I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm an author, and the police should find his killer. I'm a minister of the Lord.
Notice that not one time did she ever actually say no. The break finally came in November of 2017, when investigators quietly sent divers down into a lake in Walnut, Mississippi, and pulled out the gun that was used to kill Lorenzen, a weapon that traced right back to a man named Billy Ray Turner. Turner was a landscaper and a deacon at the very same church where Shara served as a minister, a man who mowed her lawn and, according to prosecutors, was a whole lot more than just a friend to her. A month later, both Shara and Turner were arrested, with Shara picked up all the way out in California and brought back to Memphis to face it. The story that finally came out was chilling in just how patient and cold-blooded it was. Prosecutors said Shara was the one who masterminded the whole plot, driven by jealousy that Lorenzen was moving on, and by greed for that insurance money, recruiting Turner, along with her own cousin, a man named Jimmy Martin, who was already locked up for a separate killing. They said there had even been an earlier failed attempt on his life over in Atlanta months before, and that Shara used flirty, explicit text messages to lure Lorenzen back to that familiar wooded spot and drop his guard all the way down. Martin, granted immunity for his cooperation, testified that both Shara and Turner fired shots that night as Lorenzen tried to run, and that he helped clean up the scene afterward and rode along to dump the gun in that lake. Phone records placed the crew right near the scene at the exact time those gunshots hit the 911 line, and Turner's own phone pinged the area just 2 minutes after the call. In 2019, in a move that caught nearly everybody off guard, Shara pleaded guilty to facilitation of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years, a plea that let her dodge a full trial and a possible life sentence. Turner decided to take his chances in front of a jury in 2022, and it did not break his way at all.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in count 1 of the indictment.
When the verdict came in, we looked behind us and we saw Miss Deborah, Lorenzen's mom, and we saw what her face looked like. It was a good moment.
Turner got life in prison plus a stack of extra years on top, and to this very day he swears from behind bars that he was never even there and never did any of it, telling reporters he was convicted on emotion instead of evidence.
I want to be crystal clear about this. Did you shoot or kill Lorenzen Wright?
No, I did not. I never was there.
Shara, for her part, came up for parole in 2022, still not fully owning her role in it and still trying to put it all on the men. And the board shut her down cold in a 3-0 vote, with Lorenzen's mother right there in the room fighting to keep her locked up.
It is a privilege, and it is not something that I have to receive or something that I should receive. And I'm asking today for your mercy.
But through every bit of it, the one person who never once stopped was Deborah Marion, a mother who spent well over a decade chasing justice for her boy. And even after all that pain, when she finally stood in that courtroom, she looked at the woman convicted in her son's death and asked only to be allowed to see her grandchildren. That kind of grace, sitting right there next to that kind of loss, is almost too much for a person to hold.
The
Cheryl, I want to thank you for giving me my grandchildren. That's what I want to thank you for. But I want you to unlock them so I can visit them. So they can...
This whole slow, cold-blooded pattern is not even unique, because a similar thing played out years earlier with a wealthy man named Bill McLaughlin, whose younger girlfriend allegedly teamed up with her secret lover, a former NFL player, to have him shot to death for his life insurance money, a case that also sat cold for years before both of them were finally convicted. Different names, different city, and the same ugly recipe of a partner, a lover, and a fat insurance check. So there they are, three men who once had the whole world watching them. Keshode Harris, the rapper, laid down in a bar over another man's jealousy. Jovan Belcher, the linebacker who took his girlfriend's life and then his own right in front of his coaches. And Lorenzen Wright, the hometown hero hunted down for love gone bitter and money he did not even really have anymore. 3 different games, 3 different cities, and the same hard truth running underneath all of it, that the people closest to us can be tied to the very worst thing that ever happens to us, and that jealousy and money have buried more good men than any opponent ever could. The lesson in all of this is actually pretty simple, and it has nothing to do with being rich or famous. When somebody around you is boiling over, when the arguing turns into real threats, when the jealousy stops being just talk, that is the exact moment to walk away and to tell somebody you trust, because every one of these stories had warning signs that people saw and quietly hoped would just pass on their own. Rest in peace to Keshode Harris, to Cassandra Perkins, and to Lorenzen Wright. Now, I really want to hear from you on this one. Out of these 3 cases, which one do you think the system got the most wrong, and could any of them have been stopped if just one person had spoken up loud enough in time? Drop your thoughts down in the comments and let the families be heard, because somebody watching this right now might see a piece of their own situation in one of these stories. And if this one moved you at all, tap that card on the screen and let us take you straight into the next one.